All right, let's find a seat, and I'll turn that down. Seems every week everyone migrates north or something. Is that north? I think so. I think I gotta turn that down even more. That's loud. Thanks for coming to PDX Sass. I'll get this eventually. That's a little better. This is September, PDX Sass. Welcome to everyone that came. Lots of new faces, which I'm kind of like just rattled because like trying to find faces. Hey, I see two faces I recognize, kind of thing. It's really kind of fun. So my name is Micah. I run this shindig and occasionally I speak. So today I get the joy of doing both. So you're stuck with me. I'm really sorry. But what I would like to do, and I kind of mentioned this quickly before, open the floor. My talk's not going to be super long. At least I don't think it is. If there's anyone that has like a quick 5-minute thing, cool thing they're doing, cool thing they've played with, they just want to share, I'd love to open that up, or any announcements for other meetups, cool things going on. Don't everyone raise their hand at the same time. Anyone interested in sharing that? You can do it from where you're sitting. You don't even have to walk up here. Otherwise, we're going to dive right into it. Yeah. Drupal meetup, front-end meetup, next week? Well, I know. Oh, they. Awesome. Yes, it's been confirmed. I confirmed it. Shulky, right? A Shulky, I think. Yep. Cool. So if you are in Drupal or interested in Drupal, that's next Thursday at 6, right? At the Drupal Association, which is very close to here. Second and Oak, something like that, ish. Look for a big blue drop. You'll probably find it. Cool. So yeah, that's next Thursday. I was hoping for like 2 or 3. It would just make this. Oh, sweet. Thank you. Break up the monotony.
All right. I didn't plan to say anything, but since Mike is so desperate for speakers, I'll take a minute up here. I want to speak in favor of quitting your job. Right? I think it's easy for all of us to get kind of trapped in that fear of, oh God, my job's not perfect, but it's so hard to find another job. There are so many front-end jobs out there. If you have any front-end skills, you are infinitely hireable right now. And the time when you're not being fired and not having to quit under horrible circumstances is the perfect time to look. When you're not in desperate need, that's the time to put your feelers out in the community. That's the time to talk to your friends, find out what the places they work at are like. That's the time to investigate the skills you want to learn. We've talked before about how real soon now it's going to be hard to be a front ender without knowing some of these advanced JavaScript skills like Ember. Already I'm finding when I send out applications, if I don't know Ember, sometimes I don't get a call back. Take the time to go learn your skills, apply at new places, push yourself out of your comfort zone, because we are lucky enough to work in an industry with a fairly large safety net. You will find work. Don't be afraid to take chances.
They don't all have to be soapboxy, but that was awesome. Anyone found a cool Sass module plugin website they found recently? Yes. I'm so excited to share. All right, well, you're stuck with me, so that's what you get for not saying anything. So life goes on. All right, so a couple quick bits of housekeeping. One, I want to say thank you again to Treehouse. Treehouse is a online learning library if you want to skill up. Look at that nice little segue. They do everything from iOS and Android development to web development, pretty much across the board, pretty much all of the tech skills that you would need to get any of those jobs. They've got some great courses on them at a really good price. You can try them for free for a month with this little URL right down there, trhou.sc/pdxsass14. And I would definitely suggest checking them out. I did some Ruby courses on there. It was great. It was really fun, personable trainers, and they're also local. A lot of the guys live here in Portland. Even just this last month, Dave McFarlane that came out. I think his first name's Dave. That's comic book guy. I can remember. Came out here and talked about Git this last month. So they're local. They're cool. Check it out. They are the ones that provide for that pizza that you guys just inhaled. I swear, like, this group's not that huge. There's like one more pizza I normally get. I should have gone for an extra. So big thanks to Treehouse for doing that. Again, this is PDX Sass. If you're not following us on Twitter at the moment, please have a chance to do that. We put announcements out there as to what's coming up, new events, pleas for speakers, that kind of general stuff. We also have a meetup group on meetup.com/PDXSass. So that's it. And I just got notifications coming out the ears. All right. Cool. So what we're going to do today is not actually show you any slides. So I'm just going to take this out. This is slide free. So now I have to listen to me. You have to look at me. It's going to be crazy. I'm doing a talk in a month, which means I have a month to pull together. So this means I am partway done. Get a chance to share it with you guys today and hopefully get some feedback. Maybe we can just talk about it a little bit. But the talk is on front-end architecture. And for a long time, this has kind of been a subject in my brain of what it means to be a front-end architect, what it means for a project to have front-end architecture, and how that's been lacking. So this is a talk that's going to go over that, and I don't want to spoil it too much. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive into it, and hopefully get a chance. Maybe we can talk a little bit afterwards about maybe things that I've missed, observations that you've seen, because I know this isn't 100% complete yet, and hopefully it'll be complete by the time I actually give it. So in the beginning, there was the web back in the early 90s, really quite primitive. And if you're working in the web back in those early days, you probably had one title, and that title was webmaster, a very coveted title that we wish we could still have today on our business cards. And I don't think HR they're just mean. They don't let us do that. But everyone was webmaster. That's pretty much the only role. If you wanted to make a website, you would do everything. You would do all the infrastructure, you do all the HTML, you do all the hosting. You just pretty much have to do everything because the job was such a small job that into like .com boom or anything like that. But over time, that one person found they couldn't do everything. And they found they didn't really like this stuff and they liked that stuff more. So those paths started to diverge and you started getting larger teams, each with slightly more specialized skills. One of those groups, well, as those people kind of split off into these different skills, they then start finding each other. They find each other at conferences and realize they have the same interests. They find people, well, on Twitter now, but whatever they had back then, the comments of blogs, or that's even earlier than that. How did they find people back then? They found them and gravitated towards each other to find groups that had similar goals and similar things they wanted to do. One of those groups started gathering around the idea of content. Now we've been building websites and building websites, and just make it look pretty and give us a place to start typing, right? That's really all you have to worry about with content, right? Well, there's a group of people that thought that was horribly wrong. The content needs to be a first-class citizen. That it needs the attention, it needs the dedication, resources, and time that it really deserves. They were concerned with how content was written, how content was edited, what tools they were using, how it was organized, how it was stored in a CMS or whatever that was, or how it was distributed. How is this content distributed out to our users, whether it's through email or RSS or through a website or syndication. Also about how it was presented, what order, what was the emphasis, what were the headings like, how is that actually presented to the person to read. Now, for about 15 years, these people were doing this. They were just trying to get the work done, trying to fight for what they thought was right, which was content having a place in the website workflow. And to varying degrees, people had success and didn't have success, and And in 2008, December 16th specifically, Christina Halverson came along and wrote an article. It's in a list apart, and you might have ran into it. It's called The Discipline of Content Strategy. That's only about 1,000 words. It's kind of medium length, but it really changed everything for content strategy and for the people that call themselves content strategists. Now, this wasn't the first topic about content strategy. There are plenty others, like the term's not completely brand new. There are actually even, if you go into list apart, there are 5 other articles under the content strategy tag. And this is like number 6 in that list. But this is the one that pulled it all together. This is the one that defined the heart, the soul, the purpose of content strategy. This is the one that made the case for a capital C and a capital S when you talk about content strategy. So for the first time since the creation of the internet, this group of content strategists, as they're now called, had a name. When they got together as content strategists, not just people that cared about content, but they actually had a banner, they had a discipline they could all get under. Christina urged us to urge these new disciples to take up the torch for content strategy, to go out and learn it, to go out and practice it, and also to promote it, teach it to everyone else, and try and make sure that it gets the time to make content matter. Around the same time, this is late 2008, I said, right? Something happened in the industry that kind of upheaved a lot of things. 2007-ish, a man in a turtleneck got up and held up a phone, and that phone forever changed the way that we are doing, and Scott is doing. This iPhone, you're good. You're perfect. He's a plant, really. Change the way that we look at the web, look at content, and look at the way that we develop for the web. Before then, we had these pretty set standards, what we were doing. Like 960 grid, that was pretty standard. Go over 1024, you're crazy. That's stupid. You can't do that. We had our fixed navigations that had the exact amount of space, the exact amount of characters with a nice JPEG background behind it or something like that. We had our pixel perfect Photoshop documents that could be transferred from PSD to the website with complete perfection, with ever concern or care in the world. Well, of course, that got completely turned upside down with the advent of the iPhone and Android and just proliferation of devices, screen sizes. As people get these humongous screens. I love going to old websites in a 27-inch monitor, and it takes up about this much space. Like, there's more room. You could use it. Feel free. So this didn't really call for a new discipline, though. What this called for was a brand new process and a brand new set of tools. So in May 25th of 2010, Ethan Marcotte gave us exactly that. He dropped a bomb on this whole thing. And what he did was relatively simple looking back on it. He put together 3 things. He put together media queries. He put together fluid grids, so grids that actually are like max width instead of just a fixed width, and responsive images. So instead of going, 72 ppi, it's going to be this big. My image is going to be exactly that size and fits right there. So instead of doing that, responsive images, responsive video, responsive assets, I guess is really what it comes down to create a web page that would actually fit onto any type of screen. Not only as the screen shrinks, but as the screen also expands as well. So none of these were new. I mean, the media queries had been around for a little while since then. Fluid grids, like they were doing that back within the table days, like back before they decided to do a fixed width. It was just fluid. I mean, that's just how it worked. You squish it, and then the cells squish. So these are not new ideas. But what happened was they were put together in an extremely concise way that anyone could go in and read. I still remember going to that article. I remember the pictures, these like old school like caricatures of these guys. And I still remember reading that for the first time and going, I think I can do that. And for the first time, RWD clicked for me. So RWD ushered in a completely brand new way for us to design on the web. And not only that, but it brought in new approaches to the way we design on the web. We weren't going with the biggest thing first and trying to squish it down in this tiny little phone. We decided to go mobile first, start with a mobile experience that made sense, and then expand from there and add more as we could. And as we were dealing with all these different breakpoints, now we realized that a Photoshop document is not going to work, because how many Photoshop documents do you have hit every single breakpoint, every single page, and then to make revisions is crazy. So we started moving towards designing in the browser. All of these things came about because of this just one small article that he just raised this banner and said, RWD is a thing. Here are the tools. Go do it. It makes sense. So in essence, he raised up the banner, and our workflow, our pages, and our jobs, really our jobs, have never been the same since then. The work that we do is completely changed because of that. So recently, there's been a disturbance in the force, or at least in front-end development. Front-end developers have started to get a little bit agitated, a little bit angry. And the reason they're getting agitated and angry is that when they're brought into the project, finally, it's like, hey, you're going to be on such project. Like, yes. And then 2 months down the road, you come into the project, and there's all the stuff that's already done, and you're like, no. And unfortunately, that's way too common. Coming into a project where all of that foundation has already been laid, a bunch of code's already been written, all the markups already done, all the tool chains is already set in place, and they don't have time to change it because they've got a deadline to hit. And so you better just start figuring it out. And we've been coming together. We've been finding each other. Fortunately, we have Twitter. It makes it a lot easier. Finding each other and trying to find ways that how can we make that different? Like if we could turn back time, if we could, whatever the rest of the words are, if we could turn back, no, anyone? Okay. Song is stuck in your head forever now. I know. This is why I'm recording, so I can figure out to make sure I have that. So if we could turn back time, what would we change about the project? Would we introduce gulp or grunt? Would we change the way that things are compiled? Would we say, hey, don't put that CSS in the repo? That's causing murder. Would we try and go in and reorganize the Sass? Would we try and take all the modules code and like try and bring that all into a single theme? Like, what are all these things we could have done had we come in earlier? And as we talk about this more and more and more, and more people kind of get on the conversation, we realize that we need a banner to get under. We need we need a title to get under. We need some kind of thing we can lift up and charge for it and say some Braveheart quote. I'll have to write that one down. All right. So it's time for front-end architecture. So what is front-end architecture? Well, just like content strategy, front-end architecture is a discipline. Front-end architecture is an approach. It is something that you do and something that you create. So I'm working on this as a definition, and I'm sure it's going to change about a dozen times. But at its core, front-end architecture is striving to let us develop efficiently and consistently while increasing the product longevity through a carefully planned and executed front-end workflow. So there's a couple elements in there, and I'm sure I'll tighten it up. But that's basically the gist of it. We're looking for efficiency. We're looking for not having to do things 5 times because someone else keeps overriding our code or putting in something more specific or something. Something more consistent so that this one module that's 6 different places within the site doesn't have different code each place, and you have to write slightly different code to make it work in each of those places. And we want a project that's actually going to have some longevity to it. It's not going to be this heaping pile of mess by the time we're done with it, that all you want to do is nuke it and start over. You want a project that you can actually say, all right, sweet, we've launched a website. Now we can even make it better, as opposed to, holy crap, what did we just do? We need to like cover our tracks and go find a job kind of thing. So then the way we do that is through a carefully planned and executed front-end workflow. Just like responsive web design, though, front-end architecture is also a set of tools. It's a process. So just as RWD has its media queries, fluids, grids, and flexible images, front-end architecture is as a set of tools. And today what I want to do is, these are tools that we've already used before. We've talked about them, we've demonstrated them here. You've probably played with them, you're seeing them all over the place. But what I want to do today is talk about how when we put these tools together, they become way more than just a sum of their parts. More than meets the eye, goes up on the slide, boom, 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 got some transformers, moving on. All right, so there are no slides, I'll like explain what's on the slide for each one of them. So let me talk about the 4 different parts of front-end architecture. And again, this is something where I'd love to hear if you think there's a 5th or a 6th. If I'm missing a category, need to split something up. I've come up with 4. Those 4 are coding standards, and I'm going to get into each one of a little bit more in a second. Documentation, testing, and lastly, automation, which is kind of a special one. It would be fun to talk about one way or another. So let's talk about coding standards. This is something that's been around for a while, especially when it comes to PHP and JavaScript, especially in Drupal. My God, the Drupal coding standards are extremely verbose. Like you do this right here, you write this right here, this code block goes here, and you do this, or your code's not even like accepted. So I mean, the amount of coding standards they have are pretty amazing. And they're all over the place for us. Like we're not just talking about CSS or Sass, we're also talking about our HTML. How are we writing our HTML? A recent project I've been on, they wanted to be extremely semantic. Semantic to the point where they added as much semantic stuff to a page as they could, which meant your divs, even without being Drupal, which is crazy dividus, it had like 7 or 8 levels of containers till you actually got down to markup. That was their decision. That was the standard they chose. Might not have been my choice, but those are decisions that you really need to make up front. Otherwise, you're going to say, hey, someone go, write the code for the homepage. And the code comes back, and it's like this crazy nested amount of stuff, and it's just all over the place. I just had a pull request come in a little while ago that I'm doing actually some front-end architecture for. I'm like, what are all these IDs? Really? Do you need these IDs? No? Let's just use classes, please. That's our standard. That's what we're using. There's nothing horribly wrong with IDs, but we just don't want to throw a monkey wrench in our specificity if we don't have to. Semantic versus presentational. There are certainly two sides of the fence here. I mean, front-end architecture is not about only semantic markup. You can never have presentational classes. Boom, boom, boom. It's about making a decision about what you're doing. Like, are you running a bootstrap site where you're just going to be putting classes up and down? If you're going to do that, own it. Decide that's how you're going to do it. Decide how that's going to happen. Decide what's going to happen in the markup versus what happens in CSS, and make sure that's set, like actually written down somewhere. This is where like actually having to write things. It's kind of crazy. Levels of nesting. This kind of comes back to the original. Actually, that was the fourth one. Naming standards was the other one. So like, how are you naming classes? How are you naming IDs? What are you using sections for? I've seen markup that had like section, div, section, article, section, div, section. I'm like, really? Do we need that many sections, or can we simplify it down? Like, how are we using those? So that's our markup. We want to be really specific about what markup are we writing. And sometimes it gets tricky because sometimes we're writing the markup. Sometimes that's backend that's writing the markup. I completely understand that. But if you get a chance to come on a project early, you get a chance to set these standards early. You get to say, like, this is what we want with our markup. Like, devs, can you make this happen? And in Drupal world, oftentimes it's like, hey, guys that are writing this feature, or this module, this whatever, this is the markup we'd like to have. And oftentimes they'll be like, sweet, I don't have to worry about the markup. I can just put it in. So having that chance, getting in the project early enough to be able to do that is really critical and essential. On the other side of the coin is Sass. And I've spoken at length. My first talk actually here a year and a half ago was talking about Sass organization, about having a place for everything and everything in its place. And I still stick to that. I still speak that. I still have a chance to share that several times. And the more I see other projects that don't adhere to some of the separation that I talk about, the more I see problems crop in. So that is still a huge part of it. But also, like, how are you breaking up your variable data? Like, how are you this was a big one for us. Like, how do you break up your colors? How are you actually specifying all the colors of your website? Do you have color 1 through 10? Do you have color green, color blue, color yellow, color pink? Do you have primary color, secondary color? I mean, these are naming conventions that you're going to be stuck with for a while, unless you want to do some crazy find and replace and hope you didn't screw anything up, which is what the visual regression is for later. But these naming standards and just how you organize your data is a big deal, because some people love to abstract everything. It's like, ooh, I've got padding, 5 pixels. I'm going to abstract that in a variable and use it everywhere. And I've got a 5-pixel padding variable I use everywhere. Or you might not call it 5-pixel padding, you just call it like generic padding, and then you look at the partial and like, what padding is that? And then you have to search for it and find it, and it's horrible. So don't do that. But decide what you're going to do and how these things are going to be organized, how this data is going to be propagated through the rest of your site. Yeah, levels of abstraction. Levels of abstraction, levels of nesting. This is always a hot topic of like, how deep of nesting are you going to go with this? I recently wrote some code that had 4 or 5 levels, and I'm like, I can do better. And really, you can. I mean, and this kind of comes back to the HTML, of creating HTML in a way that you don't need to write 5 selectors to find something specific enough, unique enough to hit that one selector. So what's that level of nesting, and how is that organized, or what are those expectations? Separation of layout from theme. This is another one I've talked about pretty extensively in my like organization talk. Is are you separating? Are you using a grid system? What are you using that grid system for? What are those expectations? Personally, my expectations are if you have any left or right movement of a block level element, I'm glad I figured that distinction. If it's like an inline element, okay, not a big deal. But if you have block level movement, it's going to be on a grid, unless you can give me some incredibly good reason otherwise. So if you've got an image that needs to float over and the blog title goes over to the right, that's going to be in a grid. And that gap in between them is going to be specified by the grid. And we're not going to have to worry about what that gap is. We're not going to have to worry about some random variable that you set somewhere up here that actually sets what that gap is, that maybe gets changed, maybe doesn't when you do some other work. So are you separating layout from theme? Or just what is that separation and how does that work? What are the expectations for that? Page-based versus component-based organization. This is how are you separating all the rest of your code? How is your styling code being separated out? Are you going saying all my H1s look like this? All my H1s in the sidebar look like this. If you're doing that, great. I say it's challenging when you get bigger, but make that decision and stick to it. Are you separating things out into smaller components? And are you writing partials for each one of those components? Those are things that you really need to make a decision about early. Again, I saw a merge request come through for this job or this project I'm architecting, and I saw it's like there's where was it? Be it like in the mixin file or just someplace random. I'm like, why are you specifying sidebar H2s over here? I have absolutely no reason to be here. And actually, while we're at it, let's not do that. Let's do it this way. So setting up those expectations earlier is getting that documented, making sure people are actually doing it the same way and doing it consistently. This kind of comes back also to our OOF techniques, our object-oriented techniques. Like, are we using BEM? Are we using SMAC? So, like, what methodology are we using? And make sure that people understand what that means for the project. We're using extends, OCS, BEM, SMACs, all those types of things. So that is our coding standards. Is that the word I just used? Yeah, coding standards. And it needs to be a place that's accessible. It needs to be a place that is revisable. It needs to be a place where there's no excuse for not going and reading it, or to be able to say, like, here's a pull request. That doesn't meet the coding standards. Here's a link to how it needs to be. Please review your merge request. No big deal. Just get it done because that's what we're expecting. So kind of along that same line of documentation, it goes a step further to documentation of the actual site that you're building. And this is kind of step two that really helps when this is set in place for during the project and communication between teams. Documentation. If coding standards is how code should be written, then documentation is continual proof that we've followed those guidelines. Because documentation is going to show what do our components look like? What is the code that drives those components? What partial is actually driving the style of that component? So our coding standards are going to be shown to either be succeeding or failing through this documentation. And what I'm talking about with documentation is really style guides. A lot of people, that's what you'll think of. Dave Rupert said it best, where we want tiny bootstraps for everyone. Personally, I despise Bootstrap because I've had to use it so many times in so many wrong situations that's driven me crazy, and I can rant about that for a couple days. But it does a couple things right. For one, it gives us everything we need, as long as what you need is very limited. But it gives you everything that you need. It gives you grids. It gives you your forms, your lists, your headers, your accordions, your rotators, your media blocks, your icons. It gives you all the pieces you need to build out a simple site. I usually say it gives you that 80% to build out like most of the site you want. That extra 20% costs you, but it gives you everything you need. The thing is, it gives everyone everything they need to get to that 80% point. What we're looking to build is something that's going to be 100% and get someone 100%. So it gives us everything we need, and it's really well documented. So a style guide creates a common vocabulary. It keeps inventory of our components, our functions, our mixins, our variables, and also improves testing, and it speeds up development. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what that means. A couple of really good examples of a style guide. If you've used Pattern Lab, that's kind of like the mother of style guides. There's another great one that I've started to use called Hologram that was pioneered by Trulia. I think it was the Trulia team. They're a website for real estate. Actually, they just got bought by Zillow, so they're rolling it at the moment. SassDoc is another really cool one. If you haven't checked it out, that's one done by Hugo. Can't remember his last name. If you follow Sass much, you've probably seen Hugo around. He's an awesome guy over in France. Writes some killer Sass stuff. Sass doc is actually documentation for specifically for like if you write a Sass module of explaining like how all your functions work, how your functions relate, and documenting the crap out of how that whole system works. There's a couple other systems that have been around for a bit, Style.co, KSS, or really just roll your own. In most cases I've been in, actually I think I've yet to implement a larger like pattern lab or hologram to an actual live site. I've only worked on like 2 projects in the last 2 years, so I've had too many chances. But in both of those cases, I've had just had to roll my own. So like, all right, I want a page that lists out all of the colors of the website because I'm sick and tired of getting more Photoshop docs that have almost the same yellow, but just slightly different. You're like, what? Why? Do you even know what colors we're using? So here they all are. To have all the list of all the headers. So it's like, when another Photoshop doc comes in, you're like, we've got like 7 headers almost exactly like that, but just like a pixel different in line height. Can we just use one of these that we already have? Because what a style guide really does is it gives you an opportunity for, as I said before, for common language. So that you and a designer and a developer can look at a header and go, that is the whatever, blog header. It has a name, it has an extend, it has a style, it looks a certain way. I can talk about that and you can talk about that, and you're not going to be talking about some random page and some random piece of text on a random page. We can talk about the system and talk about how that one element needs to change in that system. And if it needs to change color, you can say it needs to change from this color right here to that color right there. And the communication, the improvement there is really what's key. So you don't have to start with something like Pattern Lab or Hologram because both of those are a bit of a heavy lift. It takes some extra architecture and infrastructure to do that. So start small. Start with your colors. That's really one of the biggest areas. Like just kind of some naming convention. Like stop giving me hex values. I've got a name for that. Use the name. It's going to be a lot easier. So I have to keep decoding your hex values. Fonts, icons. Like give a list. Here's all the icons we currently have in our icon font. Pick from one of those before you send me something new. If it's not there, then sure, we can add it. And then past that, start going into your document styles, systems, and helpers. Say like, document your mixins, document your extends and your functions. So that when other people come into the project, here's all the extends we currently have. If you need a style, go and find it and see if it's here first. And if it's not, then start writing code. And that's going to save you a lot of duplicated code, a lot of duplicated effort. And then past that, if you can, if you got those 2 down, or if you're just ready to jump all the way, move to actually documenting all of your components, all of your reusable independent components that you can pull out of your code and place into a style guide. So that you can come in and say, hey, I need a rotator for this page. And someone else can go, hey, we got one of those in the style guide. There's the markup you need. There's the classes that are already associated with it. That's how it looks. Is that what you want? Rather than having to write something out, yank code from somewhere else, or any of that kind of stuff. And it also challenges you to make a rotator that will fit into a style guide. Because if you got a rotator that's like dependent upon the page that it's in, or the classes that are around it, or other content in the page, you've built a broken rotator because that thing will not go anywhere except where you built it. So breaking those things into components and getting a style guide, for one, challenges you to get them in the style guide, and then 2, allows you to reuse those pieces internally, or you get done with your project and the company's like, we've got all these other sister sites out there, other people that kind of use some of our stuff. They would love, can you just pull that out of the site and give that code to them so they can use it? I've had that exact request just a month ago with a humongous site with insane amount of cascading code that's all based on Bootstrap. So it's like, no, I can't pull that out because it's so intrinsically wound in with all of the styles on the page. If you pull it out, it's going to be completely broken. I have to give you like the entire Sass file, the entire CSS file for that thing to work because it's that like entrenched within the rest of the system. Regression testing. If you're new to this, you're not alone because this is one that's still pretty new, but I think as these sites grow, is going to be really, really important. If you've done any backend development, or especially if you've done test-driven development, this is kind of the same idea. What you're doing is you're building tests and you're waiting for the test to fail. You're like, all right, it's failed. How do I make that test work? So if you're doing backend code, that makes sense. If you're not, that might not make sense. That's completely okay. But what we're trying to do with regression testing is, okay, I've got a joke. Two CSS properties walk into a bar. A bar stool in a completely different bar falls over. Hopefully you've heard that one. It makes it a lot funnier. But it's totally true. I'm over this partial and I'm writing some code. I copy it here and I move it over here. And then something on the other side of the website that hasn't been touched in 6 months completely breaks. And you're like, what in the world just happened? And of course, it takes you 3 months to find it. And your CEO's livid because this thing's been broken and it's whatever his baby. So those are not situations that you want to be in. You don't want to be knocking down bar stools in other bars. One of the reasons for this, one of the things that's to blame is the way that we approach our inheritance model. If you caught the blog, I wrote an article a couple weeks ago called, I probably remember the exact name of it, Use and Abuse, our misuse of the CSS inheritance model. It's a long title, I should memorize it. But the premise basically being that what we end up doing is a cascade of element styles, locational styles, so like our H1 in a sidebar, our H1 in a sidebar in some kind of like classed thing, and then another class modifying it. So like 4 or 5 or 6 different sources of style applied to this H1 before you finally get a finished product. That is the system that we keep getting these regression issues. Because basically saying that like, I've got this one style way at the top that I can't change because I don't have a clue what that's going to break. If I change the line height of that one thing, my menu breaks because for some reason that H1 gets down to something that's using that line height that makes something work and these two lines connect, and then I change it one place and it breaks. Now, menu is easy to see, but what happens when it's on page C way down somewhere else? Those kind of changes are paralytic because you can't make those changes without breaking, well, without knowing, while knowing if you broke something or not. So first thing we can do is we can change the way that we work with the inheritance model. But the second thing we can do to make sure we're not breaking things is to work with visual regression. And the idea of visual regression is this. It's hard to do front-end regression testing with code because what really happens is the browser takes all this code and renders it onto a page, and that finished product is really what matters. So regression testing is going to actually test the visual appearance of a page as it stands in like a stable state and as it stands in your feature state. So the idea of regression testing, there's some great tools out there called like Diffuse, Rate, Phantom CSS, all kind of do similar things with slightly different methods. But what they do is they take 2 websites, one that's say like the live website, and the other one is a website you're working on a feature. You're working on the blog list or something like that. You're making some changes to something. And what it does, it goes through several pages automatically. It uses Phantom JS. If you ever use that, it's really awesome. So it uses Phantom JS, goes to the snapshots of however many pages you want it to do, dozens, 100 pages if you really want it to. It takes all those snapshots, goes over to your feature branch, the code you're working on, takes the exact same snapshots. Now, if you did 0 work, those snapshots should be identical. So what this is doing, this isn't actually, you're not expecting a zero-sum output from this. But what you are expecting is when it compares all those files, the only thing that should be changing is that blog listing, that one page you're working on. Regression testing will catch like, oh, hey, some random page, some bio page over here. I was changing some H1s and apparently uses that same class. I didn't realize it. Broke that page. Regression testing will allow you to actually catch those things by doing all those diffs, by trying to find out of all of these pages, have things changed between them? And if they have, are they things that are expected? Diffuse has a really great workflow that actually has basically like release states and will find things that have changed and will basically require someone checking off that this is like an acceptable change or this is a rejected change. So some of these tools have some really great workflow for that. But the point is this allows you to actually make those changes. Right now, one of my goals in this current project is to pull out of Bootstrap all the stuff that we're not using. What are we not using? Because the problem with Bootstrap is it's not only like you can use extends and stuff like that, which actually you probably really shouldn't, but it's class-based. So I don't know in our humongous CMS with pages all over the place with handwritten code, have people use this feature or not? There's no way for me to be able to figure that out without regression testing. And so my specific response was like, sure, I can do that, but there's no way I'm going to know how much I break unless we do some regression testing first. So that is what regression testing is going to allow us to do. And as we have systems that are getting larger and larger and larger, that is going to be a required key of that. So we can make some sweeping changes. So we can refactor code without just breaking random stuff and stools falling over and other bars. So the last part of it I want to talk about is automation. And we're doing fine on time, so perfect. The idea of automation is that, well, if you just compile Sass, no big deal. But if you compile Sass and then you need to run, say, what am I thinking, like Jekyll. Okay, now you have two things, two tabs open. And then if you're doing CoffeeScript, all right, now you need to have another tab open. You're going to compile your CoffeeScript. And now when you're done with everything, then you have to move it into this other folder. All that tediousness is what can be solved with automation. And actually, the first thing I want to talk about is with automation, you also want to be looking at dependency management. If you've ever worked in a kind of a complex setup using Grunt, using Gulp, or any of those other automation tools, the first thing you run into is they take lots of software. They take lots of NPM packages and Ruby gems and all sorts of stuff that you might not have on your machine. And as a new developer is coming onto a project, the last thing you want to do is spend a week with somebody trying to get their local environment set up. Now, you want to get them on the project. You want to get them committing code as soon as possible. So what dependency management allows us to do is we can create this large architecture with lots of moving pieces, with code moving around, and things being compiled, and processes being run, with Ruby gems and NPM packages and Bower installs and just you name it. And the key idea is that I can do a git clone, I can run a single command, and I have a working site that is being compiled. That is what we want out of dependency management. Not worrying about what version of this are you running or what version of that are you running. You can take this a step further and do something like puppets and vagrants and those kind of things and put everything in virtual environment boxes. So you can get pretty crazy with this. And my caveat with this whole section is that you can do a lot of this stuff by yourself. Like using bundler for Ruby, Ruby gems is really pretty simple. Like it's one file, it's a couple command line things, and it'll make sure that you automatically have all the Ruby gems you need for, Suzy or Breakpoint or whatever you're using in your Sass project. But as these things grow, they can get really complicated. And this is one of the areas in front of architecture that I am happy to say there's going to be a crossover with the work that you do and the work that some of your backend developers are going to do, some of your sysops and admins are going to be doing, because some of this gets into some crazy territory. But the key is that as an architect, you don't have to write all this code. You don't have to build all these systems, but you do need to have input in how they work. And I think that's the key that makes this part of this fourth tier of front-end architecture is like, these are the gems that I need. I need to make sure that those are going to be included in that dependency management chain. These are the packages that I want to bring in. I don't want to be committing these third-party packages. I want to be able to pull them in with Bower or NPM or whatever other tools that we need to do. So speaking of build systems, I've kind of alluded to it a little bit too much. The two big ones right now, Grunt, Gulp. I'm sure there's others coming down the line that people are writing right as we speak because they hate the letter G and they want to do something else. But the idea of either of these is that it's a single piece of software is really the best way. It's a program on your computer that pretty much has the entire build process ready for you to go. It just takes a single git clone, a single probably npm install or whatever you're going to be using, and you have a working site. These tools will spin up servers. So you don't even like MAMP, don't worry about it. This will spin up a server for you, and it'll even open a web page and pop you right into that. It'll do live reload for you automatically. So as soon as you make a change to markup, as soon as you make a change to your Sass or CSS, as soon as you make a JavaScript change, that page automatically refreshes so you're not constantly moving back and forth. It'll compile all of your assets. And I'm not just talking about Sass now. I'm talking about Sass. I'm talking about CoffeeScript. I'm talking about your font icons, whether you're using, there's a good Grunt plugin that's like Grunt icons or something like that, or if you're using Font Custom or anything like that. Or if you're compiling all of your, say, SVGs into like some kind of SVG sprite or pings into a sprite. All of that's done through this asset management, all with one build tool. The great thing is now that you've done all this work, compile everything, there's actually more that you can do on top of it to make your code even better, especially throughout the lifetime of the project. If you're familiar with JavaScript, you've probably done some JavaScript linting. And fortunately, linting is not solely in the realm of JavaScript anymore. There are some really good linting tools out there for Sass. And if you're not familiar with linting, the idea basically being that it's a tool that will run over your entire file structure and look for just common coding like errors, whether it be like forgetting, like maybe you always have a colon at the last property of a CSS of a selector. It's not required, but that's like your coding standard. So you can have linters actually go through and check all of your code for that before every single commit. Um, SAS lint, I haven't run into or gone through it completely, but there's a lot of tests that you can basically run against your code to make sure it's up to those standards. There's a ton of other tools that you can run your code against as well to get statistics, to get analysis, to find out like how many selectors do you have? Are you about to hit that IE limit? How many? There's actually I think it's CSS is the name of it. There's one that will go through and find all of the different selectors that have common attributes. So it's like, hey, these 10 different selectors in 10 different random places in your site, they have 8 of the exact same attributes. Why don't you abstract that? You can actually go through all of your code to find that, which is an extremely powerful tool. You can also run performance budgets. They'll actually compile your site, run Phantom, get some performance analysis, figure out what's your load time, what's your first time, like time to first byte, what's your page weight, all those types of things, and actually run that automatically inside your build process. And these are tools that are really, really essential for keeping track of how your project is processing through the time. There's other cool things it can do like modifying files, post-processing. So we not only need to pre-process our CSS, but we post-process it as well. But that gives some great opportunities because you have a finished file that you can run some code against. And a couple things you can do with that, especially that I've seen, is auto prefixers. Probably one of the biggest ones that's really popular right now is don't even worry about writing CSS3 prefix properties. Just write the standard, like what the normal live one's going to be. Like 10 years from now, no one's going to be worried about the prefixes. And this tool will go through, find all of those, and write all of your vendor prefixes. It's even smart enough to find the vendor prefixes that you wrote that you shouldn't have written and strip those out. I kind of love that. So like border radius, it's like, psh, those are gone. So it can do some really great things. It can, if your process is to do all of your media queries inline, but then move those media queries down to the bottom of the file, it's not really that easy in Sass, but it's really easy as post-processing. So your CSS is done, it grabs all of that and moves it down to the bottom. And it's all programmatic. It all runs on everyone's system exactly the same, so you have dependable results. So post-processing, moving, copying files around. So say everyone works in this one folder, but in the actual CMS, all the files get moved around to different parts of the project. So instead of symlinking, it's actually moving them, or you can actually even just use grunt or gulp to do the symlinking. But you can really make your working process a lot more efficient if you typically have code that's spread out all over the place. And actually, that just made me realize a project I'm currently working on is a distribution, Drupal distribution. And we've got modules all over the place. And I just realized that one of the biggest frustrations is we have modules all over the place. You have to go to all these different places to pull, git pull over here, or do code over here, or make changes over here. This would be a great opportunity to have a git or have a grunt process where you have one folder. These are all of the things that we work on. But as soon as you compile, all of that code gets symlinked or pushed or whatever they want to do on ops side to move that code to where it needs to be within the CMS. That's the power of grunt, gulp, and build systems. On top of that, if all that stuff isn't enough for you, you can pretty much just have it run any command you want on the command line. There's like a grunt plugin that's like grunt command line, grunt CLI, or something like that. Basically, pass the CLI command line commands, which is redundant. I know I even wrote it that way and I had to delete it. You can pass it that, and it'll just run it. It'll do another other stuff, run a command line. So you've got something that doesn't have a grunt plugin. It's a command line you just have to keep running over and over again. You can put that in your build system and never worry about it again. So as I said, this is a very, very tall order. It takes, especially as you get really complex in this, it takes usually way more than just an architect role to make it happen. Especially if you start getting to say like Jenkins, Travis CLI, if you have some of these continuous integration servers, all this kind of gets connected in this automation process. And so it is something that was going to bridge between front end and your DevOps. But the point is, as a front-end architect, that bridge, that communication is something that's going to be near and dear to your heart because you don't want them. Who's ever had a problem with CSS, compiled CSS committed to a Git repo? Like Git conflicts. Really? It's only me? Well, I can't because they want the CSS in the Git repo. Exactly. Because what happens is you throw up a merge request, and then someone goes and reviews the merge request 2 days later, and they're like, "Ah, I can't merge this. There's some conflicts in the CSS file." I'm like, really? That's why you can't merge this because, okay, git pull, compass clean, compass compile, push. All right, now you can do it. I mean, seriously, I don't care about the CSS. It's going to get wiped out the next time someone runs compass. Why? Anyway, so I mean, that's just one of those things that if you can get that off your plate and not be committing all these compiled assets. Same thing with icon fonts. You know, I do an icon font. He does an icon font. Now you actually have a conflict in your icon SVG, EOT, and WFF files. It's not horrible. I mean, it's something you can work through pretty easily. But if you're not actually committing all those compiled assets, life gets a whole lot easier if you can actually have that done on the server. So the big question is all of this work worth it? I've talked to you for an hour about all of these extra things that you need to be doing, all these extra things that you need to convince your bosses to allow you to come in and spend more money doing. Is it worth it for the clients to say, like, we need another person on this team at the beginning of the project rather than 2 months down the road? Obviously, my answer is unequivocally yes. Because sure, we spend some time, it costs a little bit of money, but think of the problems that we start solving. We start solving these bugs related to inconsistent code. Because, well, I wrote it for this page and it worked perfect right there. Oh, on this other page way over there written 6 months ago, it has different markups, so it doesn't work. I didn't know that. One more bug, more time spent. Um, Bugs arising from communication breakdowns. Like, I was talking about this one thing, but someone else was talking about something else. If only they had one style guide they could go to for common language, some of those communications breakdowns would never happen. Bugs from regression testing, all of those tools falling over in other bars. How much time do I spend on that? I really wish I could do a study on this because I swear at one point, our sprints are 3 weeks long. We do work, we do work, we do work, we commit it, we're good. Next sprint, we do work, we do work, we do work, we're good. The next sprint, oh, hey, there's some bugs in here I need to fix, or some, like, there's a new story in here to change this, change this, change this, change this. And I'm like, did I just do that like 2 sprints ago? How is this back here again? I found myself going back to the same, the same page or the same node type over and over and over again because somehow regression creeped in from someone else writing code somewhere else, changing something that was not intended. So how much time could we save? How much more efficient could we be if we actually had a regression testing? Another great example is we broke our development into 2 different processes. One was kind of the more automated side where we were building out content types and those kind of things. And another one was more an editorial side where they were building actually full pages from scratch because that's what we had to do. So they would work for a week or 2, and then we'd get this merge of code. We get this huge chunk of code brought in. And for the most part, it was pretty well like quarantined off, but you just never know. All this code comes in. And we just bring it in and we go and we move on and like, wow, how many things just broke because of that code? And regression testing would allow us to actually test for that before it gets merged in and fix those beforehand. And problems due to inconsistent development environment. Like, it worked fine on my machine. I don't know what your problem is a horrible answer. It's usually because I'm running a different version of this, or I'm doing this in a different process, or I'm doing this before this, or I'm committing this up and you're not, or my git ignore says this and yours doesn't, or something. So a consistent development environment is going to fix so many of those problems. And on top of that, how much time do you spend onboarding? How much time do you spend setting up an environment? If you can get like a Vagrant Puppet setup running, you're talking like, go get lunch, come back, your machine is going to be ready to like start working on this humongous complex project with 0 time, as opposed to spending days working on environment issues and trying to get your Ruby upgraded and trying to get this installed and that installed and some crazy PHP issue worked out because you're using MAMP. There's plenty of those. So it's definitely worth it because all that time you're going to spend during the project because you didn't spend the time earlier. So what I'm asking from this is not to go home and just realize how much work we have to do, because we always have so much work to do, um, but to take this banner, to take this torch with you. If you are in sales or part of any part of the sales process, raise your hand and say like, hey, you know, what we could do for you is not only develop a site, but also be developing your style guide, developing your coding standards, and have these living documents that we can actually pass on to your employees to continue using as after you take the site over. So during the sales process, talk about this and sell this. This is a value add. This is something that will help the project out. During the planning process, as you're planning the assets, the resources, the hours, the time, like get that front end developer in the get them in there earlier. Ask their opinion earlier. It doesn't have to be full time. It could be 10 hours a week. Like have them come in some meetings. What are your needs? What are your desires? Like what do you want this workflow to look like? What tools do you want to use? And let's try and find something that's going to work. So if you're involved in the planning process, think about the architecture of the site that you're trying to build and how you can improve that by getting someone in earlier. And then even down to the sprint process, like every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks that we're doing something, how is this work that we're doing this week going to impact the architecture of the site? Are we just adding a ton of technical debt? Or are we actually building a foundation that's going to improve the site and the longevity? One of the great things about this project I'm currently on, you know, it's got its challenges and its problems, but as soon as we launched, we're like, all right, we're going to stop developing features and we're going to start looking at the site, how we can improve it. Now that is what we need to be doing every sprint, is thinking like, not just new feature, new feature, new feature, new feature, but what can we do to make sure these features we currently have don't become next sprint's project because we just broke them. So front-end architecture, it's a discipline, it's a set of tools, and I really hope that there's other like-minded people that are excited about taking this out there and trying to champion it. So thanks for listening. And if you want to come to New Orleans, I'm going to be giving the exact same talk at CSS DevConf next month. So any thoughts? So I did 4, and I'm almost tempted to break out dependency management, but that's too small to worry about. Any other thoughts of like, I know one thing I actually was going to mention and I forgot to, was there's another big possible component of this, which is JavaScript. I completely gleaned over JavaScript, and I apologize to all the JavaScript people out there. But like, if you get to a point where you are needing to have a JavaScript architecture, you're probably going to be, again, splitting off into another role of someone that does, you know, an Angular expert or you know, Ember or Backbone expert to do that. There are certainly some certainly some conventions that we can follow at projects of this complexity, at least JavaScript-wise. But I personally, I really think when you start getting to a point where JavaScript needs its own architecture, that becomes more like a software architecture. This is really more talking about markup and presentation. So if you're like, what about JavaScript? There's my explanation for that. Any other thoughts of like other areas that you would want to see in that? Oh, sorry. That's fixed with continuous integration. Yeah. Yeah, I like quickly gleaned over it right at the end, saying that you're going to probably need some more technical chops if you jump into something like Jenkins or Travis. But I think I'll try and I think those are kind of those 3 pillars of like dependency management. Awesome. Okay, let's move on to our build system. Awesome. Let's move on to our continuous integration. Very awesome. So yeah, I think I'll try and do that like in a 3-tier, and obviously complexity grows as you move up that. I'd love to dive into Jenkins and just see how ridiculously crazy it is and how how long it takes for me to just throw my hands up and go, let someone else do it. Yes. Perfect question. That's a really good one. One thing I've said in the past about front-end architecture and didn't actually remember to say this time is front-end architects don't specifically, it doesn't specifically have to be a title. It's more of just kind of part of a build process. So, I mean, you don't have to have a team that's so large that you have like this one dedicated person dedicated to front-end architecture. It's really about taking some of these principles and applying them to whatever project you're on, whether it's 2 people or 5 or 10 or 40. So no, I don't think there's any, I mean, even in personal projects, I will separate out my layout. I will try and get a good variable system going. I'll get at least a basic build system with grunts or something. I'll use bundle for dependency management, just in case someone else is going to be using this, especially if I'm going to share it with somebody. So a lot of these things, I don't think for a personal project that I would get to a point where I need visual regression testing, because I don't think I'd be making that much stuff. But if it was a larger project with a client I was going to be working on for an extended period of time, I think that's when that really comes in key. And I think, yeah, I think probably the way that I said it, those 4 items are probably in order of like, work on your coding standards first. Like, how are you building code? Just write up some simple documentation for it and get that going. And then if you can move into some of the testing, move into the style guide, move into testing, move into the automation. I think that's a natural progression of complexity and project size. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question. Yes. Are you, oh, like the style guide? Do you use style guide for testing? Actually is a perfect use case. I probably mentioned it, but kind of gleaned over it. A style guide is a great place to run visual regression testing, because you know that if you have a very complete style guide, especially one that's broken up into different components and those kind of things, that's actually the perfect thing to be testing against, because you have every single component listed out there. You have every extends. You can see like with intense clarity exactly what changed on every pull request using that visual regression. One of the big challenges with large sites is you can't run it on every single page of the entire website. And then oftentimes if you run it on 5 pages and those pages all share a common element, you're going to be finding that same error 5 times for all of them. So yeah, if you can get a style guide that is so complete that running visual regression against it is like sufficient for you, that's a pretty awesome place to be, because that's a whole lot easier than trying to pick the pages that are representative of your whole site. Yep. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that comes down to kind of like showing workflows, showing processes, all those fun little diagrams with the arrows and blocks and squares and triangles that people love making and pouring time over. And actually, for a recent project I got to do some architecture on, that was the first thing I did, was sat down of like, what is my build process going to look like? Like, what's my dependency management? What's that chain going to look like? What are the pieces that need to be brought in? How are things going to be processed? What are my like different types of processes I'm going to do? And be able to lay that out in a simple diagram, with some arrows of like this is how the code's going to flow from here down to there. And that's a nice artifact that you're actually able to pass on to like maybe the developer that is implementing that. Same thing with Sass. I did the same thing, and if I took a little bit of time, I might be able to find it. Did the same thing with styles of like, how are these styles again brought together? Like I've got one finished CSS file at the end of the compile, but what are all the pieces that come into that? How are things separated up? What's a visual representation of that? Of seeing like, this is where all the layout comes from. These layout are composed of these files that come into here and go down to here, and like what the components look like, and then where the variables coming from, and like there's certainly a lot of there's a lot of visual representations that could help out with that. Um, Showing stuff, maybe showing like a process of the visual regression would be helpful, of like, here are the steps for visual regression, here's the tools we use, these are the pages that are done, these are the things we look for, this is an explanation of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, and being able to document those things, I think is really helpful as well, just to see make sure people know what they're expecting with the tool. Because like for instance, Diffuse and Wraith both use Phantom.js and ImageMagick or whatever it's called to grab screenshots and compare them. But they work in extremely different ways as far as what they compare, how they compare them, and the workflow for using the tool. So being able to like actually document that and lay that out and have those things communicable, it would be really helpful to pass on to someone else that's going, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense, and will help out our process. Hope that helps. Yes. Yeah, my superlative comment was to get a front-end developer in there as early as possible, and that could mean a lot of things, obviously. Personally, I would love to get in on the talks with the clients, on brainstorming sessions, on like talking about what are you trying to create. Because for instance, if say that's actually a great example. I was talking with on Sass Bites yesterday with Smith Schwartz. Wave hands, press buttons. She works for a company, and they have like several or a dozen different websites, all built off the same code base. So they have one set of codes of styles. They have different sets of variables that will drive that. And I think there's been some other people who have talked about that as well. But that is a very large undertaking that takes a lot of planning, and that starts way early in the process. That starts when the person's going, I need to build 10 sites. How can we build those 10 sites? And the salesperson might be like, well, I guess we got to build 10 different ones or something like that. And you could be in there and say like, well, how similar are they? Like, well, they're exactly the same except for colors. We want to be able to have everything identical, but like just be able to swap out colors and something like that. Well, that's something you can come in and say like, well, here's something you can do. Here's what the architecture would look like. Here's what the workflow would look like. Here's how the code would flow in each one of them and how the variables would work, and to be able to demonstrate that and be able to show that to the client, even just in the brainstorming sessions. So I don't think there's a time that's too early. Really, any time that you start talking about the architecture of the entire site, whether that be like migration processes, whether that be infrastructure or any of that, because you want to be saying like, hey, are we using Jenkins or something? Like, what are we doing some continuous integration? Because that'd be really cool if we could. And if we are, I've got some opinions about what we'd like to do with it. And those conversations happen pretty darn early before you start designs and those types of things. So as soon as heavenly possible, whether it's 10 hours a week or something like that, it's really, it starts as a consulting role, and then from there it turns into more of kind of maybe a team manager role, or just getting in there and writing code role. So I would definitely say as early as possible. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah, that's the beauty of Vagrant, is if you have a setup, and they're tough to make. I mean, honestly, it's one of those things that we're still, I mean, we're a company of 100 plus, and we're still trying to get really good Vagrant boxes that work consistently and efficiently, and it's not standard practice yet, but it's getting better, and we're getting better at it. But once you get there, yeah, it's like, hey, we've got a new developer. It's like, well, what kind of computer is used? Doesn't matter. Just download VirtualBox, pull down a Git repo, hit a command, and go get lunch, and you'll come back to a working environment. You can start committing code today. So I mean that is a huge win. If that's something you can sell early on in the process, then I mean that's any manager is going to love to hear that. I mean that's money saved right there. Anything else? I know I'm parched, so I'm good. Cool. Well, if you have other comments, other thoughts, feel free to ping me on IRC, on Twitter, on whatever afterwards. I need to put the rest of this thing together in a month, which I think I'm good. Some slides and a couple tweaking, and should be good to go. But appreciate you guys letting me guinea pig on you. And next week, I promise, will be it'll be I can never remember his name. It's Rian. It will be here. It was going to be here last month, but couldn't do it. It was going to be here this month, but apparently there's a convention going on. So I think we'll have to hog time and pull him on in. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Feel free, stick around. I know I'm going to stick around and grab a drink because I'm parched. And thanks again for coming. And keep an eye out on Twitter for the invite for next month. Again, it'll just be the second Thursday of each month. And we'll see you then. Bye.